In a dramatic turn that stunned Washington, the White House exposes major contradictions in testimony from AG Bondi and the FBI director, igniting fresh questions over Epstein files and Mar-a-Lago investigations.
Members' comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee, the Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer. It's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony that there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast. I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chair.
In a stunning escalation that has gripped Washington, today's White House briefing turned into a political earthquake as officials openly challenged what they described as massively misleading testimony surrounding Attorney General Pam Bondi, the FBI's handling of the Epstein files, and new revelations connected to the Mar-a-Lago investigation. The briefing spun into high drama the moment a reporter pressed the communications director on conflicting statements made by Bondi and the former FBI director about the timeline of the Epstein document, management and the legal chain of custody protocols. What followed was nothing short of explosive, as the White House accused both officials of offering testimony that cannot coexist with established records, igniting an instant media firestorm. The director walked reporters through a series of documented inconsistencies, arguing that Bondi's claim of having no operational oversight during the disputed period was contradicted by internal memos, and that the FBI director's earlier depiction of a fully synchronized federal operation clashed with newly released oversight logs. According to the White House, the contradictions raise serious questions about accountability, transparency, and whether political motivations shaped previous public remarks. As journalists leaned forward, the briefing intensified when one reporter asked whether the White House believed these discrepancies were accidental or deliberate. The communications director avoided accusations of wrongdoing, but made clear that the public deserves full clarity and that emerging evidence does not align with what the American people were previously told. And then came the moment that is already going viral. A slide displayed during the briefing highlighting the contrast between Bondi's sworn testimony and her email correspondence from that same week. Gasps rippled through the room as the White House emphasized that its goal is not political revenge, but ensuring the public has a complete picture, especially as congressional committees prepare to reopen portions of their inquiry into the Epstein document archive and the chain of custody processes that later intersected with the high-profile Mar-a-Lago search. The spokesperson noted that while the White House is not accusing anyone of criminal intent, it is deeply concerned about testimony that appears to shift depending on the political environment. This, they argued, undermines trust not just in the Justice Department, but in every federal process that relies on integrity, consistency, and factual accuracy. Reporters fired back with hard questions. Did the White House believe Bondi attempted to influence any part of the investigative narrative? Did the FBI director mislead Congress? Would the administration push for an independent review? The communications director repeated that only Congress can draw those conclusions. But the American public deserves the truth, not a watered-down storyline shaped by personal loyalties or political pressure. The briefing also touched on new internal reviews that compare testimony with time-stamped document transfers in the Epstein archive, including several batches that were reported differently by Bondi and the FBI director. The spokesperson implied that if the discrepancies continue to widen as more information is released, the administration will support a bipartisan demand to bring both witnesses back for supplemental testimony. The conversation then shifted to Mar-a-Lago, where the White House said the same pattern is emerging: inconsistent narratives, unreliable recollections, and sharply conflicting descriptions of who approved decisions at critical moments. The spokesperson insisted the public deserves clarity on why the testimonies changed over time and whether these shifting accounts were attempts to protect institutional reputations. As the briefing wrapped up, the communications director delivered a statement that is already being clipped across social media. This administration will not stand by while conflicting stories cloud the truth. America is owed an accurate historical record, no matter who it inconveniences. That final line sent shockwaves well beyond the press room, as commentators instantly speculated whether the White House deliberately intended to trigger a full congressional showdown. The reaction online has been immediate, and seismic. Analysts, legal experts, former DOJ officials, and political influencers are dissecting every second of the briefing, calling it one of the most direct challenges to previous testimony in years. Some argue the White House is preparing the public for the possibility of significant revelations. Others believe this is a strategic effort to preempt accusations of politicizing justice. Either way, Washington has been jolted. Tonight, every network is running with the same headline. The White House has officially blown open the conversation about Bondi, the FBI director, Epstein records, and Mar-a-Lago testimony, and the ripple effects are already shaking the political landscape.